The documentation blind spot. Why 60% of small businesses are one click away from disaster. So I'm sitting in a coffee shop last Tuesday and I overhear this conversation at the next table. Small business owner maybe runs a marketing agency telling his buddy about how he just got his entire customer database backed up automatically to the cloud. He's so proud of himself, saved a few $1,000s by setting it up himself over the weekend using some YouTube tutorials. And I'm sitting there thinking, oh man, I hope you wrote down what you did. Because here's the thing, and this is what keeps me up at night as someone who's spent the last 2 to 3 decades helping businesses manage risk, that backup system he's so proud of, it's probably creating more vulnerability than protection. Not because automation is bad, but because nobody documented it. Nobody wrote down the access credentials, the configuration settings, or even which systems are connected to which. It's what I call ghost infrastructure. It works great until it doesn't, and then you're completely screwed. We're in 2025, and there's this massive wave of AI-powered phishing attacks hitting small businesses. Not the clumsy, you've won the lottery emails your spam filter catches. I'm talking about sophisticated, personalized attacks that study your business for weeks, learn your communication patterns, figure out who your vendors are, and then strike at exactly the right moment with emails that look absolutely legitimate. And you want to know the common thread in almost every successful attack I've seen? Undocumented IT processes, systems that someone set up, that everyone relies on, but that nobody truly understands anymore. It's like having a bunch of employees you never trained, never supervise, and never check on, except these employees have access to your bank accounts and customer data. Hey, before we go further, if you're running a small business and this is hitting a little too close to home, do me a favor and smash that like button. Drop a comment telling me what systems you've automated lately. I'm genuinely curious what you're working with out there, and if you haven't subscribed yet, hit that subscribe button because we talk about this unglamorous, nobody wants to deal with it stuff every single week. The stuff that doesn't get you likes on LinkedIn, but absolutely will save your business when things go sideways. Let me give you a use case that'll illustrate what I'm talking about. There's this regional accounting firm, about 20 employees, doing solid work for local businesses. Over the years, they'd automated a bunch of their internal processes. Client intake forms on their website trigger automated workflows that create folders in their document management system, send welcome emails, schedule kickoff calls, and update their CRM. Super efficient. Clients loved the smooth onboarding experience. Then one day they get an email that looks like it's from their document management software provider. It's got the right logo, the right formatting, even references a recent feature update they'd actually seen. The email says there's a critical security patch that needs to be installed and it needs admin credentials to push the update. Seems reasonable, right? The office manager clicks the link, enters the credentials. And that's when things get interesting. See, because they'd never documented their IT infrastructure, nobody actually knew the full scope of what that document management system connected to. Turns out, it had API access to their email server, their client portal, their accounting software, basically everything. The attackers got in through that one credential and suddenly had access to files for about 200 small business clients. Tax returns, financial statements, the whole deal. The ransom demand was $180,000. But here's what really killed them, the response time. Because nobody had documented which systems connected to which, the IT consultant they brought in couldn't isolate the breach effectively. Every time he thought he'd contained it, it would pop up somewhere else through a connection nobody knew existed. They ended up having to shut down their entire network for 4 days. 4 days during tax season. The direct costs, about $220,000 when you factor in the ransom, the emergency IT response, the notification requirements, and the credit monitoring they had to provide to affected clients. But the real damage was reputational. They lost about 40% of their client base within 6 months. People don't mess around when it comes to their financial data getting compromised. You know what the kicker was? They had cyber insurance, but the insurance company found a clause that said they had to maintain reasonable security protocols, and their complete lack of IT documentation was deemed unreasonable. so they got a fraction of what they thought they were covered for. Let's talk about what proper documentation actually means, because I think there's a fundamental misunderstanding here. When I say documentation, people imagine these massive binders of technical specs that nobody will ever read. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about creating a living reference system that answers three basic questions: what's running, how does it work, and who can fix it if it breaks. Think about it this way. If you have a physical storefront, you've got keys, right? You know which key opens which door, where the spare keys are kept, who has copies. It's just common sense. But somehow, when it comes to digital infrastructure, businesses treat everything like it's ephemeral or self-explanatory. It's not. Here's a use case that really drives this home. There's this e-commerce company selling artisanal food products, doing about $2 million a year in revenue. Small team, maybe 6 people. They'd set up this beautiful automated fulfillment system. Orders come in through Shopify, automatically sync to their inventory management system, generate pick lists for the warehouse, create shipping labels, send tracking notifications to customers. The whole thing runs like clockwork. Then their operations manager decides to leave for a better opportunity. Super amicable, gave 2 weeks notice, trained her replacement. But here's what nobody realized. She'd set up that entire automation system using her personal email address for all the service accounts. When she left and they deactivated her email, the automation broke in about 15 different places. Orders stopped syncing, labels stopped printing, customers stopped getting notifications. They didn't catch it for 3 days because the website kept taking orders fine. It was all the back-end stuff that was failing silently. By the time they figured out what was happening, they had about 300 orders backed up, angry customers blowing up their social media, and no idea how to fix it because nobody had documented how the system was built or which email address controlled which service. They ended up paying that former operations manager $5,000 as a consultant to come back and help them untangle the mess. And you know what she told them? I assumed someone was documenting all of this in our project management system. I thought that was standard practice. That assumption that someone else is handling the documentation, it's everywhere, and it's killing small businesses. Now let's talk about these AI-powered phishing attacks because the sophistication is genuinely scary. Traditional phishing was spray and pray. Send 1 million emails, hope somebody clicks. These new attacks are different. They're patient, they're targeted, and they're disturbingly good at mimicking legitimate communication. The AI scrapes your digital footprint. It reads your LinkedIn posts, your company blog, your press releases. It identifies your vendors by looking at your accounts payable patterns if it can get that data, or just by seeing who you mention on social media. It analyzes your writing style. Do you use exclamation points? Are you formal or casual? Do you tend to send quick emails or write longer messages? Then it waits for the right opportunity. Did you just announce a new product launch? The AI knows. Did your CEO just post about being at a conference? Perfect timing. It crafts an email that fits seamlessly into your expected communication flow. I came across a use case involving a small software development shop. They'd automated their deployment pipeline. Code gets committed, automatically tested, and if it passes, automatically deployed to production. Pretty standard DevOps practice. But they'd never documented the security controls in that pipeline or who had access to modify it. An attacker sent an email to one of their developers that looked like it came from their project management tool. The email referenced a specific feature the developer was actually working on because the attacker had scraped their public GitHub commits and included a security update that needed to be merged. The developer, working late, tired, seeing an email that looked completely legitimate and referenced his actual work, merged the code. That malicious code sat in their production environment for 2 weeks before it activated. It exfiltrated customer data slowly in small chunks, mimicking normal database backup traffic. The only reason they caught it was because one of their customers noticed suspicious activity on their account and reported it. By then, data from about 5,000 users had been compromised. The financial hit was about $280,000. Notification costs, legal fees, regulatory fines from GDPR violations for their European customers, and the PR firm they hired to manage the crisis. But again, the real damage was reputation. They lost 3 major contracts worth probably $600,000 in annual recurring revenue. Companies didn't want to work with a vendor that couldn't protect their data. And here's the thing that makes this so insidious. If they'd had documented security protocols, someone would have caught that merge. They would have had a checklist that said, all code changes require a second pair of eyes, even for security updates. But because their deployment automation was this undocumented black box that just worked, nobody questioned it. You know what's interesting? The businesses that get hit hardest by these attacks aren't necessarily the least tech-savvy. Sometimes it's the opposite. It's the businesses that have embraced automation enthusiastically, but haven't matched that enthusiasm with discipline around documentation and security protocols. There's this concept in risk management called complexity collapse. It's when your systems become so interconnected and automated that they're more fragile than if they were simpler and more manual. You're moving faster, sure, but you're also creating more failure points that you don't understand. I think about this retail company, furniture store with both physical locations and e-commerce. They'd automated their inventory system across all channels. When something sold in-store, it automatically updated online availability. When something sold online, it reserved it in the warehouse system. Returns in one channel, updated availability in all channels. Really sophisticated setup for a company their size. But nobody documented the business logic in that automation. So when they ran a promotion and needed to exclude certain items from being sold online while still keeping them available in stores, they couldn't figure out how to modify the automation without breaking something. They ended up overselling about $80,000 worth of inventory that they didn't actually have. Had to issue refunds, deal with angry customers, and take a massive hit to their margins because they had to expedite replacement orders at higher costs. That wasn't even a security breach, just a routine business need that became a crisis because the system was undocumented. Imagine what happens when you add hostile intent into that mix. Hey, if you're still with me, I appreciate you. This stuff isn't sexy, I know. Nobody's going to share a post about documentation discipline on their Instagram stories. But if this is making you think differently about your business systems, do me a solid, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment about your biggest concern with your current IT setup. Are you worried about a specific system? Have you already experienced something like what I'm describing? I read every single comment, and honestly, your real-world situations help me understand what topics to cover next. We're building a community here of business owners who deal with the messy reality, not the LinkedIn highlight reel. Let's get practical for a minute, because I don't want this to just be doom and gloom. What does good documentation discipline actually look like? And more importantly, how do you implement it without it feeling like you're creating bureaucracy for its own sake? First thing, and this is the foundation of everything, you need a system inventory, not in your head, not in some email chain, but in an actual documented form. What software and services does your business use? Who has access to each one? Where are the credentials stored? How do the systems connect to each other? I recommend starting with what I call a data flow map. You literally draw boxes for each system in your business and arrows showing how data moves between them. Your CRM talks to your email platform. Your e-commerce site talks to your inventory system. Your accounting software talks to your bank. Map it out. Here's a use case that shows why this matters. Small architecture firm, about 12 people. They'd been in business for probably 20 years, grown organically, added systems as they needed them. They had project management software, a client portal, CAD systems, accounting software, file storage. Typical setup for a firm their size. They got hit with a ransomware attack through a phishing email. One of their junior architects clicked a link thinking it was from a supplier. The ransomware encrypted their file server, which they knew about immediately. But what they didn't realize was that their file server was also connected to their backup system, their client portal, and their project management tool. The ransomware spread through all those connections because nobody had mapped out the infrastructure. They couldn't just restore from backup because the backup system was compromised. They couldn't communicate with clients through their portal because that was encrypted. They couldn't even see which projects were at what stage because their project management data was gone. They were basically operating blind. The ransom was $150,000. They paid it, had no choice, really, but it took 3 weeks to fully recover their systems. They missed multiple deadlines, had to refund about $90,000 in deposits because they couldn't deliver on time, and spent another $50,000 on IT consultants to rebuild their infrastructure properly. Total impact was probably close to $400,000 when you factor in lost productivity and lost business. The brutal part: if they'd had that data flow map, they could have isolated the ransomware in minutes instead of letting it spread through their entire infrastructure. That's the power of documentation. It's not just about understanding what you have, it's about being able to respond effectively when things go wrong. The second layer of documentation is what I call the decision log. This is where you record why you configured systems the way you did. Why does your automated invoicing system require manager approval for amounts over $5,000? Why does your customer onboarding workflow send notifications to specific people? Why does your backup run at 2 a.m. instead of midnight? This seems like administrative overhead until something needs to change, or someone wants to optimize a process and accidentally removes a critical control. I've seen it happen so many times. There's this medical billing company processing claims for about 30 small clinics. They'd automated their entire workflow. Claims come in, get validated, submitted to insurance, and then the payments get reconciled automatically. They'd built in a check where any claim over $10,000 required manual review because they'd been burned by fraud before. New operations manager comes in, sees this inefficiency, notices that 99% of claims over $10,000 are legitimate, and removes the manual review step to speed things up. Makes sense on paper, right? Except 3 months later, they discover that a compromised clinic account had been submitting fraudulent claims. Because there was no manual review, those fraudulent claims sailed right through. Total loss was about $180,000 before they caught it, and they had to pay back the insurance companies plus penalties. If they had documented why that manual review existed, the new operations manager would have thought twice before removing it, but because it was just this undocumented quirk in the automation, it looked like unnecessary friction. The third critical piece is access management, and this is where most small businesses are completely vulnerable. Who has admin access to your systems? When was the last time you audited those permissions? Do former employees still have access to your cloud services? Here is another use case involving a small PR agency. They'd automated their media monitoring and reporting, set up feeds from various news sources, automated compilation into client reports, scheduled delivery, pretty slick. But it was all set up using the agency owner's personal accounts for various services, because at the time they didn't have business accounts for everything. Fast forward 3 years. The owner gets phished, not through a business email, through her personal Gmail account. The attacker gets access to her password manager where she'd stored all those service credentials. Suddenly they have access to client data, media contacts, upcoming campaigns, everything. The agency had to notify about 40 clients that their data might have been compromised. They lost about 15 clients immediately, not because of the breach itself, but because they couldn't answer basic questions like, who had access to our data and how did you protect it? They had no access logs, no documentation of permissions, no audit trail. It looked negligent because, frankly, it was. The owner told me later, and this stuck with me, she said, I thought because we were small, we weren't a target. I thought hackers went after big companies with valuable data. I didn't realize we were valuable precisely because we were small and unprotected. That's the fundamental misunderstanding I see everywhere. Small businesses think they're flying under the radar, but you're not under the radar. You're the preferred target because you're easier to breach and less likely to have security protocols in place. Here's something that doesn't get talked about enough: the legal liability angle. We're seeing courts and regulators increasingly expect businesses of all sizes to maintain reasonable security practices. And in 2025, reasonable includes documenting your IT infrastructure and security protocols. There's this concept in law called negligent data security. Basically, if you experience a breach and you can't demonstrate that you took reasonable precautions, you can be held liable for damages. And courts are starting to define reasonable precautions to include basic documentation. I know of a use case involving a small online marketplace. They connected buyers and sellers of specialty equipment. They stored payment information, transaction histories, seller verification documents, all that stuff. Got breached, about 8,000 users affected. Several users sued for negligence. The marketplace tried to argue they'd done everything reasonable for a company their size. They used encryption, they had firewalls, they kept software updated. But in discovery, it came out that they had no documented security policies, no access logs, no incident response plan, and no documentation of their IT infrastructure. The judge basically said, security tools without security practices isn't security. They settled for an undisclosed amount, but rumor is it was north of $300,000. Plus, their insurance company denied the claim because the policy required documented security procedures as a condition of coverage. That's the thing about documentation. It's not just operational best practice, it's increasingly a legal requirement. Regulators are getting serious about this stuff, and we're too small to have formal processes isn't going to fly anymore. So what does the implementation actually look like? Because I know what you're thinking. This sounds like a massive project that requires resources you don't have. And yeah, if you try to do it all at once, it's overwhelming. But here's the thing, you don't have to do it all at once. Start with a 1-hour audit. That's it. Block out an hour this week, sit down and list every system that runs your business. Just make a list. Your email platform, your CRM, your accounting software, your website host, whatever you use. Don't worry about being comprehensive or perfectly organized. Just get it out of your head and onto paper. Then, next week, spend another hour filling in the basics for each system. Who owns the account? Where are the credentials stored? Who has access? You're not trying to document every technical detail. You're just creating a basic inventory. Week 3, pick your highest risk system, usually anything involving customer data or financial transactions, and document it more thoroughly. What does it connect to? What data does it access? Who can modify it? What happens if it fails? That's 12 hours over 3 weeks, and you've gone from zero documentation to having a solid foundation. From there, you just maintain it. Anytime you add a new system or modify an existing one, you update your documentation. It becomes part of your process, not this huge separate project. The businesses I work with that do this well, they're not spending more time on IT management. They're actually spending less because they're not constantly firefighting problems that arise from undocumented systems. They catch issues early, they can troubleshoot faster, and they can scale without everything breaking. Let me tell you about the long-term impact of good documentation discipline because I think that's what finally convinces people it's worth the effort. Another use case is a marketing agency, about 15 people doing good work, growing steadily. About 5 years ago, they had a serious security scare. Didn't actually get breached, but they realized how vulnerable they were and committed to documenting everything properly. Built out their system inventory, documented all their automated processes, established security protocols, the whole deal. Fast forward to last year, they're ready to sell the business. Owner wants to retire. During due diligence, the buyer's IT consultant reviews their infrastructure, and you know what? Having comprehensive documentation of all their systems and processes added about 15% to their valuation. The buyer was willing to pay a premium because they could see exactly what they were getting. They could assess risk accurately, and they knew they wouldn't lose critical knowledge when the owner left. That documentation discipline they'd built 5 years earlier, which probably cost them 30 or 40 hours of work total, added about $400,000 to their sale price. That's the kind of long-term value I'm talking about. But even if you're not planning to sell, the operational benefits compound over time. Employee onboarding gets faster. You can bring in contractors or consultants without weeks of knowledge transfer. Your team can take vacations without everything falling apart. you can actually grow beyond the handful of people who understand how everything works. Here's the counterintuitive thing about documentation. It actually enables faster innovation. People think documentation slows you down, creates bureaucracy, makes you less agile, but it's the opposite. When you understand your systems clearly, you can modify them confidently. You know what will break and what won't. You can experiment without fear of catastrophic failure. I think about this e-commerce company that documented their entire fulfillment automation. Because they had that clear picture of how everything connected, they were able to add new sales channels, Amazon, eBay, their own mobile app, in a matter of weeks instead of months. They knew exactly what each integration needed to touch, what security considerations applied, and what could break. That documentation made them more nimble, not less. The businesses that struggle to adapt and scale aren't the ones with too much process. They're the ones with too little. They're the ones where everything is tribal knowledge locked in people's heads, where adding something new means months of tentative experimentation and inevitable breakage. Let's talk about the human side of this for a minute, because I think that's where a lot of resistance comes from. People don't want to document because it feels like admitting they might not be indispensable. If everything you know is written down, can't you be replaced? But that's backwards thinking. The businesses that value you most are the ones where you've made yourself scalable, where your knowledge isn't a bottleneck but a foundation that others can build on. I've seen countless examples of employees getting promoted specifically because they documented their work so well that they could hand it off and move into bigger roles. And from a security perspective, the knowledge in one person's head model is terrifying. What happens if that person gets hit by a bus, or just goes on vacation when something breaks, or leaves for another job? There's this nonprofit I worked with, small team, doing important work in their community. Their entire grant management process was automated by one person who'd been there for years. She knew every quirk, every workaround, every edge case. Then she got seriously ill and was out for 2 months. They couldn't process grant applications, couldn't report to funders, basically ground to a halt. They eventually had to bring in a consultant who spent 3 weeks just reverse engineering what she'd built. When she came back, the first thing they did was have her document everything. And you know what she told me? She said it was a relief. She'd been carrying all that knowledge around, feeling like she couldn't ever take a real vacation, worried about what would happen if she left. Getting it all documented freed her from that burden. Documentation isn't about making people replaceable. It's about making knowledge durable and accessible. It's about building a business that can survive and thrive beyond any single person. All right, we've covered a lot of ground here. If you're still with me, you're clearly serious about protecting your business, and I respect that. Here's what I need you to do right now, and I mean right now, not later when you have time. First, subscribe to this channel. We release videos every single week on the unglamorous, critical stuff that keeps small businesses running. Risk management, security, operational discipline, the stuff that won't get you Instagram likes but will absolutely save your business when things go wrong. Second, hit that like button and drop a comment telling me, what's the one system in your business that scares you the most? The one where, if something went wrong, you'd be in serious trouble? Put it in writing. Hold yourself accountable. I'll respond to every comment I can. Third, and this is the most important part, block out 1 hour on your calendar this week, not next week, this week, for your system inventory. Just list what you have. That's the first step, and if you don't take it, none of this matters. I have put together a free documentation template. Reach out in the comment section and let me know you are interested, and I will send it to you. It's the exact framework I have used with consulting clients. It walks you through creating that system inventory, documenting your automated processes, and establishing basic security protocols. Get it, use it, modify it for your business. Look, I know this isn't fun. I know you'd rather be working on the stuff that directly generates revenue. But here's the reality. That $200,000 average breach cost, that's not hypothetical. That's happening to small businesses every single day. Businesses just like yours. And the common thread in almost every case is undocumented IT infrastructure and missing security protocols. You wouldn't run a retail store without knowing what inventory you have or where you keep your keys. Your digital infrastructure deserves the same level of basic management, not because you're paranoid, but because you're responsible. The businesses that survive and thrive in 2025 and beyond won't be the ones with the most sophisticated automation or the biggest IT budgets. They'll be the ones with the discipline to document what they build, the foresight to think about security before a breach, and the operational maturity to treat their digital infrastructure as seriously as any other critical business asset. So, start this week. 1 hour, make the list. That's how you go from vulnerable to protected, one documented system at a time. All right, that's what I've got for you. Take care of your business, and I'll see you in the next video.